Ladies and gentlemen, friends, colleagues, good evening. It's a great honour to be here, and an occasion that I hope you'll all very much enjoy. The format is that I'm going to say a few words about the occasion, Richard Burton and Chris himself in the book, and then Chris will speak to you, and then we'll take some questions, and then we'll all enjoy the film that Chris will introduce. So that's the idea, and I'm going to stand, if I may. I've actually got two copies of Richard Burton at home now, one on the top shelf, so I can stand there proudly, and the other on the floor so I can stand on it to see. Those of you who were at Wembley in 1999 will know that Scott Gibbs of Swansea, before he scored that marvellous try, danced in front of Lawrence Bruno Nero Delalio. Great name for an English rugby captain. And he said, "I feel good tonight, I feel good tonight, I really feel good tonight." Well, I feel proud tonight, I feel proud tonight, I really feel proud tonight, and I want to explain, if I may, why I feel so very proud to be standing here before you. I want to begin, however, by saying that it's not a commonly known fact that the Vice-Chancellor and I share the same initial, you know, for our given names, Richard B. Davis and David B. Smith. Mine is for Burton, my middle name. The Vice-Chancellor's, I understand, is not, but by proxy it is, because in a sense the Richard Burton Centre, Richard, is your creation here at Swansea, as is so much else that has come in the last 10 years out of the humanities and research teams that you've built here. The Richard Burton Centre, a very proud name, named after a Port Talbot rapscallion called Dickie Jenkins and a Mountain Ash aesthete called Philip Burton. And in a profound and in an echoing sense, I think it means, the Richard Burton Centre, that we are all the love children of that wondrous, bad, exciting and dangerous society that was Richard Burton's first and abiding love, and that is South Wales. And that's the first reason why I feel enormously proud of this university, of my first university in research terms back in the 1960s, and my last university as a practicing academic. My next work, incidentally, Vice-Chancellor, is a novel. Some people think I've been writing fiction all my life. We'll find out. But I'm proud that this university, as I say, along at the forefront of all that has been best about the articulation and the scholarship of the otherwise neglected culture and literature and arts of 20th century South Wales, actually had the courage to name a centre of research and a centre for such scholarly study after what some may have erroneously felt at the time was a mere actor. And I feel pride in you because you threw that academic snobbery, that Philistine sneer, that intellectual narcissism back into the dust where it belongs, and you did so in the name of the people of South Wales that you represent more than any other. Now, Burton knew in his lifetime, and certainly in those 25 years from his birth in Pontrhydyfen, that Chris sketches so elegantly, so brilliantly in his introduction. From his birth until the dawn of the 1950s, he knew in those dynamic years what the profound values of that South Wales, of its communities, of its society were. And he knew that they were wrapped in a common culture, and a common culture that was both a struggle and a dream. And it's why he, Richard Burton, in turn, and we can see it so wonderfully in the diaries, valued from the off, even in that poverty-stricken background of his Port Talbot, of his Pontrhydyfen, of his West Glamorgan. He valued books, he valued ideas, he valued literature. He was interested in politics and civics all his life, even as he became, tragically you might say, far too much of a dream himself. And yet always, it was a dream in which he was awake and alive to its root in that society and in its origins, even as he branched out beyond it. We are, but we certainly were very much a vocal culture, one that needed to speak out to the world, one that needed to speak out perhaps beyond the page, from an Irene Bevan to Gwyn Thomas, and to act from Stanley Baker to Cliff Morgan, on all of those fields of play and praise we created. And Burton was, I think, in tone and intent, all his life, at his root, one of us. And he was one of our greatest voices, whether on the stage, on screen, or here triumphantly on the page. So, on an evening of justifiable pridefulness for Swansea University, and certainly for Chris Williams. I'm further extremely proud that these magnificent diaries have now, as John Spur was saying, resounded all around the world, from South Wales to Southern California, from Singapore to Swansea, from the Evening Post and the Daily Mail to the Sunday Times, and now the New York Review of Books. It has been, quite simply, a triumph, and a triumph, as John said, of which you can all feel justly proud. And with God knows how many thousand copies now, Chris, in hardback, and selling, a bestseller unmatched, as Richard Davis said, in the annals of this university, certainly since Kingsley Amis penned Lucky Jim. And if Richard Burton rightly takes centre stage in all this, and the plaudits due to his diaries, he wouldn't, of course, be here at all again in this form before us if he hadn't been dressed, produced, stage managed by his editor, Professor Chris Williams. Now, Chris will forgive me for saying, as he's heard me say so many times before, and will not groan as this old man tells yet again of how I first met him in 1981 when he was 17 and on the verge of a distinguished university life as a student at Balliol and then as a research student at Cardiff and now as Professor of Welsh History at Swansea. And he won't mind because, and it's a true validation that I'm reaching for here, he won't mind because he is such a good historian that he knows that the telling of this tale is precisely itself a part of that assembling and sustaining of our common culture, of our heritage, of our ordinary extraordinariness. And an apogee of achievement of that culture is such as the Richard Burton Diaries. Swansea University has long understood how vital its own role has been for over half a century in its support of Welsh history, of Welsh culture, of Welsh writing, of Welsh literary criticism. And I really do think that Swansea, above all other higher education institutions in Wales, has been quite crucial, instrumental in the shaping of our nation's history in the last 50 years, and will continue now to be so with even more drive. So I think it's extraordinarily fitting that an historian should be asked to edit these works, because an historian sits at the heart of that spider's web. These words, 500,000 of them, and the editor's greatest achievement, as you read on, and those of you who bought it tonight will do so, you'll find, incidentally, if you're reading it in bed, it'll be difficult to keep it at arm's length. But then whoever kept Richard Burton at arm's length in bed? And as you read on, you'll find the editor's greatest triumph is that he's scarcely there. That is, that you scarcely know that he's there, except when you read him in his footnotes, when you read him to elucidate, to comment, to clarify, to guide, and facilitate. It is an absolutely meticulous piece of scholarship that Chris Williams has achieved in editing the diaries of this mere actor. So, from his introduction, as I say, succinct and elegant, to the informative and wonderful footnotes, this is a masterly performance. And make no mistake, Chris Williams deserves equal billing with the star, his star of Richard Burton, as the credits roll and proclaim this book and this university to the world. Burton and Williams, individuals both, talents in the firmament, both, but both knowing which world they are shining down on and why they wish to shine down on it. And we are so lucky that it is our world that they illuminate. So my final pride tonight, then, is to introduce formally my former student and my great friend, Professor Chris Williams.
Thank you very much, Di. Wonderfully eloquent and elegant, as ever, and extremely kind in your comments to me. And thank you, everyone, for coming to the launch of the diaries here in Swansea this evening. When we planned this event, we weren't sure exactly when the book would be published. It was, of course, published in the UK in late September and in the US in mid-October. And apparently, according to the publisher's distributor, it's become a worldwide bestseller. So that is absolutely fantastic. I won't rehearse the long list of publications in which it's been reviewed, but they've been extensive in Australia and the US, as well as here and on the continent of Europe. And we've had quite extensive media coverage and broadcast media as well. Yesterday I did 14 radio interviews with American radio stations from Baton Rouge to Cincinnati to Memphis to St. Louis, all, I'm afraid, from my office in the Keir Hardie building. And at 3:45 this morning, I got up to do a 1-hour chat show, which was kind of 11 p.m. In the evening in the US, the Jim Bohannon Show, syndicated across 300 radio stations in America. The diaries have been mentioned in the Welsh Assembly by Christine Chapman and have been written about in the Western Mail by the Education Minister, Leighton Andrews. But undoubtedly, the most exciting aspect of all of this has been the live launches in Cheltenham, New York, Los Angeles, Port Talbot, Singapore, and now here in Swansea. I think the first inkling I had that the publication of the diaries was going to be a huge event came when I arrived at Cheltenham on the morning of Saturday the 13th of October to discover that I would be appearing on stage with Richard's niece, Rhiannon Trowell, and Richard's friend, the actor Robert Hardy, in front of an audience of 800. And, you know, that session was emotional and spine-tingling and electric. And the first, I suppose, sense that I had of how important this book was going to be for people who knew Richard and who remembered Richard came when Robert Hardy said this. I won't attempt to imitate his accent, but he said this: "My thrill about this book, which I've gone through every page of, and I think I've made notes and quote marks on every page, is that, as happens when you get to my age," and Robert's is 87, "because of my age, memories of Rich, except for particularly sharp moments, were beginning to fade a bit, like the leaves come off the trees at this time of year. And then this suddenly came in front of me, and there was Rich again in all his glory and horror and vivid imagination, his invention, his myth-making. He was alive again for me, and for days I've been going around thinking, where is he? He's about somewhere. It's all in this book." So after that, we went to New York, and on the Monday, I appeared in front of 5 million Americans on the Today Show with Matt Lauer. And then on the Tuesday night, we launched the diaries with the enormous help of Catherine Brace of the Department of the First Minister of the Welsh Government, and that was at the New York Public Library for the Performing Arts in a show featuring the singer, Pontypridd's own Iris Williams, actors Brian Mallon and Matthew Rees, and of course an honorary degree presentation by the Vice-Chancellor to Michael Sheen. The most both magical and surreal moment for me was being interviewed on stage about the diaries by Matthew Rees playing Richard Burton. 2 days later, and we were in Los Angeles for another fantastic launch event at the residence of the British Consul General, featuring the Welsh actor Ioan Griffith, and very specially Richard's daughter, Kate Burton. And then a week later, we were in Port Talbot for another very different event, but a wonderful event at the school, Dufferin School, where pupils who were Richard's age when he wrote his first diary read out passages, and when some of Richard's childhood friends and family were there. It's not over yet. Tomorrow I'm at a launch event in London hosted by the Cymrodorian Society. Next week there is a headline appearance in the People's Republic of Pontypridd at the Ponty in Print event, and at least another 10 talks in the course of next year. Yale University Press tell me that they expect to sell 40,000 copies of the book by Christmas, that the e-book is selling well, and that a paperback version is scheduled for release next summer. So it's been a bit of a whirlwind. It's quite unlike anything I've experienced since the publication of Democratic Rhondda in 1996. And I'm very grateful that all of the press coverage and the reviews have been so positive. It's a bit nerve-wracking, of course. You go online to find out that a review has just appeared in, I don't know, the Sydney Morning Herald or something like that, and then you read it very, very rapidly, looking for anything negative. So it's kind of like sitting through a PhD viva where you can't answer back. And when I was in Singapore, Di remembers this, I was asked whether editing the diaries and whether the reception of them had changed me as a person. It was a bit of a profound question. And I found it very difficult to answer. I suspect that occasionally Richard Burton's personality has had an influence. While we were waiting to go to the launch event in Los Angeles, I was sat in the hotel bar and I had to sort of while away half an hour and try not to get too nervous. I'd finished preparing what I was going to say. And I wondered, what would Richard Burton have done? Well, there were no eligible young actresses in the vicinity, so I thought I had Jack Daniels on the rocks. And I think the Vice-Chancellor and the Director of Marketing, Kath Mullin, were a little bit worried when they came down and found me with this whiskey in hand, and Kath plied me with mints in a taxi journey to the residence of the British Consul General because she didn't want me to smell the alcohol on my breath. But that episode apart, and apart from my youngest son Owen asking me the other day, "Dad, are you now famous?" I think nothing much really has changed. And there are two very good reasons for that. I mean, the first thing I think is that I'm here tonight as the front man for what has been a collective enterprise, really a succession of team efforts from beginning to end. At the start, the diaries were secured for the university by the efforts of the Vice-Chancellor, by Howell Francis, Chris West, Kevin Williams. They've been curated and transcribed in the archives by Elizabeth Bennett and Katrina Legg. There are key colleagues here tonight, Noel Thompson, John Spur, Louise Miskell, and Helen Fulton, who's now at the University of York, all of whom made it possible for me to devote a chunk of my time to editing the diaries. And there's been great support in recent months from Andrea Buck, Elaine Canning, and Helen Baldwin and Sarah Robb, really creating the opportunity for the kind of Burton Fest that's been all-consuming since September. So, my name is on the book's jacket, so is that of the publisher, but it would be entirely appropriate, I think, for a Swansea University crest to feature there as well. The second reason is that I'm just the editor. It's not me or my ideas that are under the microscope in this book, but the life and writings of Richard Burton. And what has astonished and pleased me in assessing the reaction to the diaries is that evidently, globally, Richard Burton remains a name to conjure with. It's a fascinating life, a tremendous journey, and I think his observations on that journey in his diaries are compelling. And to illustrate that, I'm just going to read, how are we doing for time? I'm just going to read perhaps 3 extracts from the diaries, so we then have some time for questions. So this is from the 13th of November 1968. Elizabeth said last night that I behaved just like Rachel Roberts. Probably I did, which is just as well, as it means we'll never be invited again to the Duke and Duchess of Windsor's soirees. And thank God, he said fervently. Rarely have I been so stupendously bored. There were 22 people for dinner, and only 2 names did I know or remember, and that was from history, the Count and Countess of Bismarck. And he, the Count, looks as much like one's mental picture of the Iron Chancellor as spaghetti. Soft and round and irresolute, he couldn't carve modern Germany out of cardboard. The iron of his grandfather didn't enter his soul. It's extraordinary how small the Duke and Duchess are. 2 tiny figures like Toto and Nanette that you keep on the mantelpiece, chipped around the edges, something you keep in the front room for Sundays only. Marred royalty, charming and feckless. Elizabeth just reminded me that at one point I said to the Duchess, "You are, without any question, the most vulgar woman I've ever met." At another moment, apparently, I picked up the Duchess and swung her around like a dancing, singing dervish. Elizabeth was terrified that I'd drop her or fall down and kill her. I will arise and go now and go home to Welsh miners who understand drink and the idiocies that it arouses. They had to have licensing laws to cure us, and we were incurable. I shall die of drink and makeup. That was the high society. Here's Richard in a more reflective mood, 20th of April 1969. I've been going through one of my periodic moods of depression for the last 3 days, periods when the very thought of seeing anyone except Elizabeth gives me a real physical pain. And when I'm not drinking, which I've not been for the last 3 days, it is at its worst. Actually, during the last 12 months or so, I've become increasingly antisocial, and am only really at comparative ease when fairly drunk. Time was when my chiefest enjoyment after love-making and a good poem was standing at a bar with a convivial few and rambling around poetry and politics and ideas of all kinds, generally second-hand, of course, and talking of every subject except the loathed one of acting. And now, nothing except to be crouched over a book in our bedroom with the air conditioning turned on to drown the noises of the outside world. To lift the mood, this is an entry from the 17th of August 1980, and Richard is now appearing on stage in Camelot. When we were in Toronto and we received without fail standing ovations at every performance, I warned the cast not to take it for granted that it would only happen occasionally, if at all, in New York. But I was wrong. The same thing happens here with unfaltering regularity. I used to get the occasional house to stand up for me in previous plays, but now they always do. Will they in Chicago and the rest of the places? It's a phenomenon that I am puzzled by. Is it nostalgia? The roars I get when I take my second solo calls are almost exultantly savage. Is it a ferocious hunger for the past, a massive hiraeth, a sort of murderous longing for home and security and simple peace? I don't know. It cannot be simply the performance. Some nights, unavoidably, though I try like the devil to climb to the audience's expectations every time I play, I am not so good. But the final reaction is exactly the same. Is it that the audience knows so much about me, or think they do, from my highly publicised and infamous past? Is it because my performance is now truly dynamic? But no, it can't be that, because only in the last couple of weeks have I taken absolute control of myself on the stage. Is it a combination of all? I shall never know. But let me say at once that to this little shrinking Welsh violet, it is highly gratifying. Will the ovations continue? I will refer to them never again, unless they stop. Well, I can remember, I never saw Richard Burton act, of course, I never met him. I remember the first film I saw him in when I was a boy, Where Eagles Dare. I remember reading the article he wrote on the last time he played rugby in a book that my father bought to mark the centenary of the Rugby Football Union in 1970. And I can also remember, as a newspaper boy delivering the morning's newspapers, reading about Richard and Elizabeth's remarriage in 1975 and then their subsequent divorce. So I have certain memories, they're all second-hand, they're all indirect in a way, but in speaking about Richard, in researching Richard, and in launching this book in the places that we have launched it, time and again I've met people who have very fond and vivid memories of Richard. They saw him perform on stage. Just somebody emailed me the other day to say they'd seen him play Hamlet on Broadway in 1964. They stood near him in the Angel Hotel in Cardiff before an international. Or even they remember him in his RAF uniform teaching them in Sunday school in Taibach. So 28 years after his passing, his life continues to exert a fascination, and it's been a great privilege to have worked on his diaries. And I hope that when you read them, you'll find them as funny, as warm, as self-lacerating, and as poignant as I did. And that you might come to share Robert Hardy's view of the diaries, which he expressed at Cheltenham last month. Robert said, "He, Richard, longed above all things to go back to Oxford, to become a fellow, to take a full degree, and contribute a work of rare quality to leave behind him. And in its variegated, curious, explosive, fantastical fashion, this work, for me, does it. This is an extraordinary and unusual work of literature, and he has left it for us. So in that degree, I think he's fulfilled what perhaps was his main ambition in life." Thank you.